One of the privileges I have as a journalist is I have the opportunity to get the big picture, just to take a step back and look at some of the underlying trends that are making a difference. And in this session, what I want to go through are some structural shifts in the economy, which I think are going to shape the pattern of demand for real estate over the coming decades. Principally, I'm going to be looking at the economy and employment within the economy. So this is how things have changed historically in the UK. What we can see here is the primary sector, which is agriculture. You see that relentless decline to almost 1%, just 1% of employment. You can also see the change in terms of manufacturing, which is the secondary sector. So that has more than halved since its peak in the 50s and 60s, and heading towards 10% or so. And you see the relentless rise of the services sector, and that is clearly the biggest sector now. More than 80% of all employment is in the services sector. Now, this is that was Bank of England data. This is data from the Office for National Statistics. What we have here is 81% of the UK economy is now services. 83% of jobs in the UK economy are now services. Now, I'm picking on the UK. We're sort of as West European, broadly, the geography of this conference, but I'm picking on the UK partly because I know it best, but also, obviously, the UK was the first country to industrialise. This is how the Office for National Statistics talks about where people work. I would say it's not particularly insightful. You can sort of see, I mean, I'm not expecting you to be able to read the dots on here, but broadly you can see a decline in manufacturing, decline in agriculture, and the rise in all of the sort of service type numbers. I think we need a different way of thinking about things, and I'm going to be pinching Paul Slattery's worldview here. Paul's in the front row. And that's to break down the services sector into three subsectors. So what we're talking about is the public sector, we're talking about business services, market services, and finally experienced businesses. This is a chart from Paul's forthcoming book. This puts into context how those subsectors fit in. The orange line across the top is manufacturing. You can see that decline happening there. You can see the silver line, grey line, and the yellow line, which are public sector and service business sector, respectively. And you see the rise there. But also note that dark blue line, which looks set by the end of the 2030s, or certainly maybe before the end of the 2030s, to cross over and become a bigger employer than manufacturing. And of course, scraping along the bottom is the agricultural sector. Now, as we look at these subsectors, I think we've got to think about what's going to be happening within them. And it's clear that I would suggest that the public sector doesn't have a lot of room to grow. Now, this may be famous last words with the impending Labour government we've got coming, but I really do think they're going to be challenged to put much more tax money into the public sector and grow that. The picture for the market services subsector is rather more nuanced, rather more mixed. There are sort of competing forces going on here. We have a rise in personal services, so where you're having a plumber coming in to fix things, where you're having painters and decorators, where you're getting your dog groomed, all of that kind of stuff, gardeners, all of that kind of stuff, that's on the increase. However, artificial intelligence is going to be a huge dent, I would suggest, in terms of future growth prospects for business services, particularly professional service jobs. Interestingly, the World Economic Forum report there, what it talks about in terms of where future jobs are. Despite all the talk about self-driving cars, actually they're anticipating over the next decade more jobs in driving. Where they're not expecting more jobs is things like legal services, things like accountancy, things like asset management. Those are the jobs which are under threat, according to the WEF. Similarly, the IMF there, the International Monetary Fund, a report out at the beginning of this year, 60% of jobs are going to be touched by AI. We can't overhype the gloom. We've been through various stages of change and industrial revolution. The WEF talks about 4 industrial revolutions, the first being the steam revolution, the second being the communications revolution at the turn of the 19th and the 20th century, the railways and the telegraph, and the third industrial revolution was computerization, the rise of the silicon chip. This occurred really in the 70s, and this is this is what in 1960 an Excel spreadsheet looked like. Those jobs went. You know, they don't exist anymore. New jobs were created. But what happened in that third industrial revolution was the automation of lower level tasks. This fourth industrial revolution is, I think, a sea change in terms of what we can expect the machines to do. All the hype is around the large language models, ChatGPT, but it's been ongoing for a decade plus now, machine learning and so on. There are skeptics about AI, about how impactful it's going to be. This is perhaps one of the more erudite ones. It's Daron Amaglosu, who is from MIT, is a professor of economics at MIT. But even though he's a skeptic of AI, he thinks it's still going to lead to about 1 to 1.5% increase in global GDP. We have much more bullish forecasts than that, though. So in that headline you saw from the BBC where they talked about 300 million global jobs being under threat, that was based on this Goldman Sachs report, just over a year old now. And what the Goldman Sachs economists are talking about is a 7% growth in global GDP. That's $7 trillion coming into the economy. There are similar consultancies out there talking the same thing about AI. Capital Economics, the Roger Bootle consultancy, they think that it's going to be 1.5 percentage points on productivity every year for the next decade. The McKinsey Global Institute talks about 3 to 4% additional GDP growth between now and 2040. Where's all that extra wealth going to be spent? Well, those of you who have been following this event since its inception, we had originally planned to hold it in June 2020. Unfortunately, as you may recall, there were a few viral difficulties. We had as a speaker at that event, James Woolman, whose book here, Stuffigation, I think speaks very much to what's going on. People have got enough sofas, they've got enough smart cars. Their real focus now is on self-actualization. That's Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, getting to the top of that pyramid. And that's where the push is. And that push is very much into the experience economy. So very briefly, in conclusion, what I want you to sort of take away from these 10 minutes is that we're about to see, I think, a very significant productivity increase. It's going to add an enormous amount of wealth. And that wealth is going to go into principally the service sector, which is the big growth sector, but not all of the service sector is going to be treated the same. There's little room for growth in the public sector, and it's pretty mixed outlook in terms of the market services sector. So the big beneficiary over the coming decade, 2 decades, as AI really kicks in, is going to be the experience economy. Thank you.